Hi again, 3CM, Mrs. Coggins here. So Mrs. Morris and I had a good idea that I could read you the end of day story. So I found this book on my shelf. It's called The Secret of Platform 13, and it's actually quite an old book 'cause it's from when I was little. And I really used to love reading this book. I've always liked books that are about witches and wizards, which is probably why I like the Harry Potter books so much. And this is a kind of a witch and wizardy one as well, although it's got more hags and ogres in it than witches and wizards. So I thought I'd read a chapter of this to you each day. Okay? Are you ready? So, The Secret of Platform 13. Oh, it's by an author called Ibbotson. So, chapter 1. If you went into school nowadays and said to the children, "What is a gump?" you would probably get some silly answers. "It's a person without a brain like a chump," a child might say. Or, "It's a camel whose hump has got stuck." Or even, "It's a kind of chewing gum." But once, this wasn't so. Once, every child in the land could have told you that a gump was a special mound, a grassy bump on the earth, and that in this bump was a hidden door which opened every so often to reveal a tunnel which led to a completely different world. They would have even known that every country has its own gump, and that in Great Britain the gump was in a place called the Hill of the Cross of Kings, not far from the River Thames. And the wise children, the ones that read the old stories and listened to the old tales, would have known more than that. They would have known that this particular gump opened for exactly 9 days every 9 years, and not 1 second longer, and that it was no good changing your mind about coming or going, because nothing would open the door once the time was up. But the children forgot. Everyone forgot, and perhaps you can't blame them. Yet the gump is still there. It is under platform 13 of King's Cross railway station, and the secret door is behind the wall of the old gentleman's cloakroom, with its flappy posters saying, "Trains get you there," and its chipped wooden benches, and the dirty ashtrays in which the old gentlemen used to stub out their smelly cigarettes. No one uses the platform now. They have built newer, smarter platforms with rows of shiny luggage trolleys and slot machines that actually work, and television screens which show you how late your train is going to be. But platform 13 is different. The clock has stopped. Spiders have spun their webs across the cloakroom door. There's a left luggage notice with a notice saying, "Not in use," and inside it is an umbrella covered in mould which a lady left on the 5:25 from Doncaster the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee. The chocolate machines are rusty and lopsided, and if you were foolish enough to put your money in one, it would make a noise like "humph" and swallow it, and you could wait the rest of your life for the chocolate to come out. Yet, when people tried to pull down that part of the station and redevelop it, something always went wrong. An architect who wanted to build shops there suddenly came out in awful boils and went to live in Spain. And when they tried to relay the tracks for electricity, the surveyor said the ground wasn't suitable and muttered something about subsidence and cracks. It was as though people knew something about Platform 13, but they didn't know what. But in every city there are those who have not forgotten the old days or the old stories. The ghosts, for example. Ernie Hobbs, the railway porter who'd spent all his life working at King's Cross and still liked to haunt around the trains, he knew. And so did his friend, the ghost of a cleaning lady called Mrs. Partridge, who used to scrub out the parcels offices on her hands and knees. The people who plodged about in the sewers under the city and came up occasionally through the manholes beside the station, they knew. And so in their own way did the pigeons. They knew that the gump was still there, and they knew where it led. By a long, misty and mysterious tunnel to a secret cove, where a ship waited to take those who wished it to an island so beautiful that it took the breath away. There's a little picture, look. That's the old station, all dusty and cobwebby. The people who lived on it just called it the island, but it has had all sorts of names. Avalon, St. Martin's Land, the place of the sudden mists. Years and years ago it was joined to the mainland, but then it broke off and floated away slowly westwards, just as Madagascar floated away from the continent of Africa. Islands do that every few million years. It's nothing to make a fuss about. With the floating island, of course, came the people who were living on it. Sensible people mostly, who understood that everyone did not have to have exactly 2 arms and legs, but might be different in shape and different in the way they thought. So they lived peacefully with ogres who had 1 eye, or dragons, of whom there were a lot about in those days. They didn't leap into the sea every time they saw a mermaid comb her hair on a rock. They simply said, "Good morning." They understood that Ella women had hollow backs and hated to be looked at on a Saturday, and that if trolls wanted to wear beards so long that they stepped on them every time they walked, then that was entirely their own affair. They lived in peace with the animals too. There were a lot of interesting animals on the island, as well as ordinary sheep and cows and goats. Giant birds who had forgotten how to fly and laid eggs the size of kettle drums, and brolachans like blobs of jelly with dark red eyes, and seahorses with manes of silk which galloped and snorted in the waves. But it was the mist makers that the people of the island loved the most. These endearing animals are found nowhere else in the world. They are white and small, with soft fur all over their bodies, rather like baby seals, but they don't have flippers. They have short legs and big feet like the feet of puppies. Their black eyes are huge and moist, their noses are whiskery and cool, and they pant a little as they move because they look rather like small pillows, and they don't like going very fast. The mist makers weren't just nice, they were exceedingly important. Because as the years passed and newspapers were washed upon the shore, or refugees came through the Gump with stories of the world above, the islanders became more and more determined to be left alone. Of course they knew that some modern inventions were good, like electric blankets to keep people's feet warm in bed, or fluoride to stop their teeth from rotting. But there were other things they didn't like at all, like nuclear weapons or tower blocks at the tops of which old ladies shivered and shook because the lifts were bust, or battery hens stuffed 2 in a cage. And they dreaded being discovered by passing ships or aeroplanes flying too low. Which is where the mist makers came in. These sensitive creatures, you see, absolutely adore music. When you play music to a mist maker, its eyes grow wide, and it lets out its breath and gives a great sigh. "Ah," it will sigh. "Ah, ah." And each time it sighs, mist comes from its mouth. Clean, thick, white mist, which smells of early morning and damp grass. There are hundreds and hundreds of mist makers lolloping all over the turf or along the shore of the island, and that means a lot of mist. So when a ship was sighted or a speck in the sky, which might be an aeroplane, all the children ran out of school with their flutes and their trumpets and their recorders and started to play to the mist makers. And the people who might have landed and poked and pried saw only clouds of whiteness and went on their way. Though there were so many unusual creatures on the island, the royal family was entirely human and always had been. They were royal in the proper sense, not greedy, not covered in jewels, but brave and fair. They saw themselves as servants of the people, which is how all good rulers should think of themselves, but often don't. The king and queen didn't live in a golden palace full of uncomfortable gilded thrones which stuck into people's behinds when they sat down, nor did they fill the place with servants who fell over footstools from walking backwards from their majesties. They lived in a low white house on a curving beach of golden sand studded with cowrie shells, and always, day or night, they could hear the murmur and slap of the waves and the gentle soughing of the wind. The rooms of the palace were simple and cool. The windows were kept open so that birds could fly in and out. Intelligent dogs lay sleeping by the hearth. Bowls of fresh fruit and fragrant flowers stood on the tables, and anyone who had nowhere to go, orphaned little hags or seals with sore flippers or wizards who had become depressed and old, found sanctuary there. And in the year 1983, the year the Americans put a woman into space, the Queen, who was young and kind and beautiful, had a baby, which is where this story really begins. The baby was a boy, and it was everything a baby should be, with bright eyes, a funny tuft of hair, a button nose and interesting ears. Not only that, but the little prince could whistle before he was a month old. Not proper tunes, but a nice peeping noise like a young bird. The Queen was absolutely besotted about her son, and the king was so happy that he thought he could burst. And all over the island the people rejoiced, because you can tell very early how a baby is going to turn out, and they could see that the prince was going to be just the kind of ruler that they wanted. Of course, as soon as the child was born, there were queues of people around the palace wanting to look after him and be his nurse. Wise women who wanted to teach him things, and sirens who wanted to sing to him, and hags who wanted to show him weird tricks. There was even a mermaid who seemed to think she could look after a baby, even if it meant she had to be trundled round the palace in a bath on wheels. But although the queen thanked everyone most politely, the nurse she chose for her baby was an ordinary human. Or rather, it was 3 ordinary humans, triplets, whose names were Violet and Lily and Rose. They had come to the island as young girls and were proper trained nursery nurses who knew how to change nappies and bring up wind and sieve vegetables, and the fact that they couldn't do any magic was a relief to the queen, who sometimes felt she had enough magic in her life. Having triplets seemed to her a good idea, because looking after babies goes on night and day, and this way there would always be someone with spiky red hair and a long nose and freckles to soothe the prince and rocking and sing to him, and he wouldn't be startled by the change, because however remarkable the baby was, he wouldn't be able to tell Violet from Lily or Lily from Rose. So the 3 nurses came, and they did indeed look after the prince most devotedly, and everything went beautifully, for a while. But when the baby was 3 months old, there came the time of the opening of the gump, and after that, nothing was ever the same again. There was always excitement before the opening. In the harbour, the sailors made the 3-masted ship ready to sail to the secret cove. Those people who wanted to leave the island started their packing and said their goodbyes, and rest houses were prepared for those who would come the other way. It was now that homesickness began to attack Lily and Violet and Rose. Homesickness is a terrible thing. Children at boarding schools sometimes feel as though they're going to die of it. Doesn't matter what your home is like, it's that it's yours and that's what matters. Lily and Violet loved the island and they adored the prince, but now they began to remember the life they had led as little girls in the shabby streets of North London. "Do you remember the bingo halls?" asked Lily. "All the shouting from inside when someone won?" "And Saturday night at the Odeon with a bag of crisps," said Violet. "The clang of the fruit machines in Paddy's parlour," said Rose. They went on like this for days, quite forgetting how unhappy they had actually been as children, teased at school, never seeing a clean blade of grass and being beaten by their father. So unhappy that they'd taken to playing in King Cross Station and had been there when the door opened in the gump and couldn't go through it fast enough. "I know we can't go up there," said Lily, "not with the prince to look after, but maybe their majesties would let us sail with the ship and just look at the dear old country." So they asked the queen if they could take the baby prince on the ship and wait with him in the secret cove, and the queen said no. The thought of being parted from her baby made her stomach crunch up so badly that she felt quite sick. It was because she minded so much that she began to change her mind. Was she being one of those awful drooling mothers who smother children instead of letting them grow up free and afraid? She spoke to the king, hoping he would forbid his son to go, but he said, "Well, dear, it's true that adventures are good for people even when they are very young. Adventures can get into a person's blood, even if he doesn't remember having them. And surely you trust the nurses." Well, she did, of course, and she trusted the sailors who manned the ship, and sea air, as everybody knows, is terribly good for the lungs. So she agreed and had a little weep in her room, and the nurses took the baby aboard in his hand-woven rush basket with its lace-edge hood and settled him down for the voyage. Just before the ship was due to sail, the queen rushed out of the palace, her face as white as chalk, and said, "No, no, bring him back, I don't want him to go." But when she reached the harbour, she was too late. The ship was just a speck in the distance, and only the gulls echoed her tragic voice. And there's the queen, look, running after it. Chapter 2. Right, well, I hope you've enjoyed the first chapter, and I'll read chapter 2 tomorrow. Have a good day.